how it would, because even for me, when I was looking at it, I was like, how can, I mean, that's difficult to comprehend, even though they would say the exact same thing we do, that his humanity would have suffered, but not his divinity. But then it would be like, well, aren't you making a distinction? He's like, but yeah, they'd be like, yes, for the understanding of that, but they were not separated, they were the same thing. Right? You know, that's when it begins to be like, really? Because we need to make that distinction because of those reasons, because it's, one, at least for me, is a very logical way of putting it out. Because if we start down the road of saying, well, his human side, but it's not his human side, but it gets close to saying that his divinity suffered, which is not possible. So it gets very confusing, and they actually admit the confusion, and they understand that, and they say, well, technically, yes, we believe the human and the divinity, but we don't want to separate the, make the distinction between the two in a way that, like we did with two natures.
But if they believed in the death of Christ, that means that God, to them, God, it's one nature, God is dead too.
Yeah, see, that's what would be another thing for me. They would say, well, the humanity of Christ. It was like, well, you have to, well, you just said the humanity of Christ. I was like, yes, but the divinity can't be separate. It's like, I know that. But the divinity, exactly. I mean, it comes down to that. It's like, it gets really confusing. And that's why it's many times pointed to the language issue. And that's what it was. And we're discussing it right now. Except, you know, you have big burly Egyptian men and very, there was a lot of stubborn people involved. I won't use not any disparaging language, but there were a lot of very headstrong bishops who were saying the same thing in different ways, but would not have it the any other way at that moment. But again, there was a slight confusion among some of how to understand this. And you can see their conundrum because they did not want to accidentally fall into the Nestorian view of parsing it out even so much that there's just, you know, a divine being inside of a human being. Almost like, you know, one of those Russian doll situations. But they did not want to, they were worried about that. We were worried about the it turning into monophysism, being a monophysite.
I'm having a senior moment. I forgot about. Oh, are there any Coptic churches active today?
Oh yes, there's a great deal. The Coptic community is mostly, well, the Coptics specifically are based in Egypt, Alexandria being their head church. They call, I forget the current pope for them, but he resides at the chair of St. Mark, because St. Mark is buried there, and that's where their branch of the church was founded. But they're in Egypt, but also spread out to the Middle East. Actually a fairly large population, oddly enough, is in Northern Europe. They wound up there because of the various persecutions by the various Muslim groups that were there, and the Ottomans that came into power later, which was a weird situation altogether in itself. But they ended up in places like Sweden, Norway, and Britain. That's kind of where we got the whole British Oriental Orthodox situation that's sort of recognized but not recognized by the Oriental Christian community.
Well, have they got a ruling body like the Catholics have, the Curia have, you know, to make decisions on what their beliefs are?
Sort of, and I say sort of because they don't have a specific hierarchical structure to which it would be prone to that. They would believe in more of a council idea. They don't actually have a first among equals, although that's the understanding. Like if, say, Greek Orthodox throughout the world would have all the other bishops, as we would say, would come together, but the Patriarch of Athens would not be well above everybody, but they would call him the one, the head above all the equals. And so they have that in a way, but amongst themselves, they each have a head in a very weird way. but not really. It's one of those not really, but yes, which is difficult because there is not a single person who can speak for all of them, because each group would be like, wait a minute, no. The Armenians do not speak for the Egyptians. It's like, well, the Egyptians don't speak for the Armenians, so it begins to get that back and forth into where, like, even in Eastern Orthodoxy, there is an understood hierarchy in the sense of which patriarch has a little bit more clout than the other one. Specifically, the Greek, because the Russians will recognize the Greeks, and the Greeks recognize the Russians, but the Russians also believe that they are actually the descendants of those in the ancient Constantinople, which they see themselves as the new Constantinople, but the Greeks also kind of consider themselves the new Constantinople, but not as much as the Russians do, because of the Russian Empire. And they were kind of put under the heel of the Ottomans there for a while. So they said, we're the new Constantinople, we're the new Byzantium Empire. So yeah, that got more complicated, but yeah.
You said they call them Pope? Who is it, the Catholic Coptics?
No, the Oriental.
The Oriental call them a Pope, not a patriarch or something?
Yeah, this tradition that they would call him Pope, and actually refer to Athanasius as Pope. Pope Athanasius, Pope Cyril, because he was he had one of the main churches, because St. Mark. So they refer to him as Pope, even though there's other bishops, and they probably would not refer to him as them as Pope, but a lesser title. But that language also gets confused because where we got the term Pope, and the understanding of that kind of got more conflicted back and forth, because the Pope and then I won't say the Archbishop, the Patriarch in Constantinople was not called Pope, but he was believed to be pretty high up on the scale because, you know, the Imperial Church, and then that gets the whole into the West, just called Pope. The guy sitting on the chair of St. Peter, you know, then we got Constantinople, then we had Alexandria, which kind of turned into like a triangle of a fight, basically what happened at the very end of things. Yeah. Well, we have St. Mark, we have St. Peter, we may have St. James over here. It's like, okay. And it kind of got divided and pulled apart. Yes.
Monty, go ahead.
Hey, at the beginning of your talk, you mentioned something that's always had me wondering.
Sure.
And probably confused. Lord, when you say your prayers, who am I talking to? And the context that clarified that a lot. I'd like to find a reference that you used.
Okay, sure. It's just literally called the Athanasian Creed. Pass that down.
And then the second thing, when you started talking more on the divinity of Christ, that he feels pain and suffering, I thought, well, it's the shortest verse in the Bible, Jesus wept. I mean, that should explain the human side of it quite a bit.
Yeah.
You don't weep, you know, the death of Lazarus, but Martha and Mary.
Yeah, because in our understanding that, I take a very Thomistic view, which it's again going to be language. We all say the same thing, but in different ways, the various schools. But the understanding that Christ, because he was perfect in his humanity, and also divinity, which is perfect by definition, he had complete control of his faculties, his emotions, and everything. And he wanted to just shut that part of himself off and not feel pain, not cry, not have any of this stuff. But he decided to feel it. He decided to allow himself to feel all those emotions, those pains, those sufferings, which is pretty profound to think about it, because he could have just been on the cross and, okay, I'm turning it off, but he knew that he had to. It was necessary. So that understanding that his perfect humanity and the divinity were so intertwined, but yet he was so perfect in his humanity, he could control pain and suffering within himself, which gives us a clue of what people were like before the fall of humanity, in a way. So the understanding that also with that we will be that way when we receive our new bodies, which won't have any problems because there won't be any pain, so that kind of negates the first part of it. So, yeah. The understanding that in his perfect humanity, he could shut off those parts if he wanted to, but he refused to.
The Venetians would give you an argument as to where St. Mark is buried.
This is true. I think they actually might have, I don't actually know.
They
I think,
purloined it out
Yeah.
of Alexandria in a casket of
I think, yeah, and I think
Pig
they
meat.
were, I think they
pork,
worked it out later.
casket of pork.
Yeah, I remember that, and I think what they did was they decided later on that they were going to divide Saint Mark. Or they returned him, one of the two, I can't remember how that turned out.
Yeah.
But I do remember the story how they smuggled the bones of Saint, and the Coptics helped,
Yeah,
because knowing that they didn't want the relics of the saint to be desecrated or destroyed, because we've seen on the news how that happens to various saints in parts of the world, being attacked by various extremes. But they smuggled Saint Mark's body out by taking pork and putting it over, the casket, so that when the Muslim guards would come, they wouldn't come closer because it was pork, it was not halal, so they wouldn't touch it. So he was saved by pork, which I think is appropriate. So, yeah, and then it got to Venice, where they had the beautiful church there made for it. And I
St.
can't-
Mark's.
And I know that they came to a compromise or something later on. I don't know if the entirety of St. Mark was brought back to Egypt or how that worked out altogether.
Well, they
Because they
claim,
insisted in the spiriting away of St. Mark's remains because they didn't want anything to happen.
they claim to still have his relics in
They may
Venice,
have
so-
it like at school as well. So
Mm.
I think, yeah, it gets more complicated in the past when things kind of happen that way. It's kind of like, Christendom's first black ops situation. We're gonna go in and extract. Yeah.
So Father, I recently ran into family that they're Vietnamese, but they go to a Vietnamese Catholic church. Is that just a Catholic, like a Roman Catholic church, that they just have the service, same service in
Yeah.
Vietnamese versus a
Yeah.
a separate type of?
Saint, not saint, but
Yeah.
Divine Mercy.
Okay.
Yeah, we have the Vietnamese church, Divine Mercy, down the street here. And but there's also, actually pointing that out, there's also a small group that may have developed, also in China as well. It's the Catholic Church, but the one that's been approved by the communist parties, which we don't recognize. Because they're like, you're gonna be the bishop, because you say you uphold the party line. Yes, I believe the communist government of China is wonderful and it shows the fullness of Christ's teachings. It's like, don't kill me. But we don't recognize that. It's sort of like they say, oh, we have a new Dalai Lama, we have a new Panchen Lama. He's like Vice Dalai Lama, basically. He's like, but the Panchen Lama that the Dalai Lama chose as the incarnation of the person who's going to choose the next Dalai Lama, this boy here, and they're like, oh, it's the new Panchen Lama. Little boy Panchen Lama went bye-bye. We don't know where he's at. The Chinese Communist Party says he is safe and his family are in a wonderful, safe environment. Lord knows what that means. But they put their own little Panchen Lama. Now look at him, see, it's the new Lama. We're so nice to the Tibetans. He's like, the Communist Party is wonderful and follows all the Buddhist teachings completely in the foot. It's like, we heard this one before. And so they kind of get that division between the situation. But then again, there are Oriental Catholics that are different from Oriental Orthodox. And there's also difference. Yeah. It gets more spicy.
Father, was there ever any conflict between the Vatican and Alexandria trying to formalize the Coptics into accepting the fact
There have
that,
been
yes,
many attempts over time, but those attempts typically kind of big egos, and kind of get in different ways. So a lot of time, every time there was a try to a reunion, basically the same things that kind of happened with the Eastern Church. We believe it, we believe the same things. We might get a little bit dicey on the understanding of the, when I mean dicey as in, they do in a way recognize the Immaculate Conception of Mary, but they will not say that because we said that. Yeah. So it was one of those things where it's like, They tried reunion several times as a whole, and that's where we ended up getting Ruthenian Catholics, the Ukrainian Greek Church, which is, Father Armstrong, and the various other groups that kind of back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So there was a reunion, and then more came in, more rights into the church. Then that fell apart, so half stayed, group stayed, group didn't, and it kind of went back and forth. And that's kind of where we have some Copts that are actually in union with Rome and some that are not. It's like, St. Sophia's church down here and St. George's church down here, we're both Coptic, but St. Sophia's decided to go along with Rome and that kind of thing. So it went back and forth and continues to do that. We even had as early as the early 1900s, a group of Greek Orthodox became Catholic, which really ticked off the Greek Orthodox patriarch. But they are a very small group of Greek Orthodox Catholics. So it'd be the Greek, There's so many smaller veins and groups that your eyes just kind of go across and trying to figure out who's who and what's what, unless you have that big long list of how many people who what, which is like 5,000 people who are that specific community of Greek Orthodox Catholics. Which are different from Greek Catholics from the Ukraine, which we would call the Byzantinian Greek. I know you have to look at that. But there's so many different Greek parts, there's so many different Ruthenians, so many different other groups that it does get insane. But all those various groups believe the same thing for the most part. And a lot of, not all of them, we recognize and they recognize us. It's just the fact how, maybe we can come to some understanding as a union, which would be a lot helpful because we see the divisions we're having right now, and we could really use some of the strength from their side and some of the stuff from our side, and we kind of come together and bring about that unity that would, say, look what happened. We've become one. We were, but we're now officially, would go a lot further to bring that evangelical spirit and evangelizing the world and the union of the churches. John Paul II called them the right lung of the church or the left lung. A lung of the church. I can't remember whether it was left or right, but it's a lung.
Well, they had to submit to the Pope then, right? The patriarchs or whatever, the Coptic.
Yeah, it was they had a different understanding of recognizing as the head of the church, and that it has primacy in such as this. So it's one of those, if you ever see pictures of or paintings, depending on the situation, of the First and Second Vatican Councils, you'll see bishops and you see cardinals in their cardinal get-ups and bishops, but then you also see the eastern half of the church in the big crowns and various things. Cardinal Regali tells a lovely incident about having to run and find one of the patriarch's crowns because he left it on a bus. It involved a hammer and a bus window that he did not do, but the Italians did for him. So
if we were to travel and you're looking up a Catholic church, are we gonna get in the wrong church? I mean, if you're looking up, on the internet today, you can get more places to go to church and.
it would be one of those moments where you're like, I don't know if I'm in the right spot, but I'm just gonna pray and be here and hope that I'm in the right spot, because they'll see if I'm in Egypt and they're looking at me like, you look Coptic. Am I? I don't know. Are you Catholic? This is like one of those situations. How do we get this across by not offending anybody in between? It's like, are you the real people? Are you this? Are you because it would come down to, for our understanding, I do not know what it would be like with the Coptic church, but I know on our standpoint, if we were to go, say, we were in Russia and there was no Catholic church, we could legitimately attend a divine liturgy in a Russian Orthodox church. But then, more than likely knowing that we were not Russian Orthodox, we would refrain from receiving communion, but we would still be there for worship at that moment. Same thing with the Greeks. or the various other Orthodox communities. Now, with the Greeks, it's a little bit different because they're a little bit more amicable about such things than the Russians. But at the same time, it depends on which Greek group you talk to, because there's some Greeks that are like, you're all going to hell. It's like, you stay in your monastery, you're fine, you know.
Yeah.
Because there are various groups, because used to, the Russian patriarch would not even speak to Catholics, would not speak to the Pope, would not speak to anybody because they're all damn heretics. So we've come a long way. But the understanding that if, you know, happen to be in that situation, I would be just, okay, I don't know what's going on, but I can. That wouldn't happen with me necessarily, because, you know, I can do my own thing. But with, you know, everybody else, it's the same, you know, the same situation. You know, can't tell.
Would they have a
what it is.
vigilite?
Hmm?
Would they have a vigilite in the
It would be like most Orthodox communities in which they would probably have the sacrament reserved, but in a dove hanging above everything. So it'd be like just a single piece
Host.
of, yeah, we call it a single host that would be there for that. So we'd be symbolizing the Holy Spirit, the unity, the truth, the beautifulness of it all. Which I think is really lovely. I've seen this before.
What?
Oh, okay.
Okay.
We're timing. Okay, so that was the confusing situation of politics and semantics and words. In the name of the Father, and Son, and Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Glory be to the Father, and
To the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end.